So, Ash, you just got back from the post-apocalypse, apparently, as you actually got the chance to try out The Last of Us 2 as part of this whole major media event where they showed off a pretty significant chunk of the game, and you've had a chance to really go hands-on with it and get a sense of it.
Yeah, they had a really nice event, literally like 10 minutes away from where I live here in Los Angeles, and they sat us down to a surprisingly large chunk of the game. And when I say large, I mean there were like 2 separate 2-hour demos, even longer if you take your time exploring like I did. So I would say they both kind of almost took me 2.5 hours in a way. So it was a lot of game there.
That is a meaty chunk. I mean, I remember the original Last of Us being surprisingly lengthy. I want to say close to 15 to 20 hours, somewhere around there. But this, I mean, how big is this game if they're showing that much? That's what I'm wondering.
Well, that's the question, and I mean, I gotta say, one of Neil Druckmann was there to give a little presentation before we actually started playing, and he did say, word for word, that this is Naughty Dog's most ambitious game yet in terms of scope and length. And man, I mean, just having played these 2 demos, I could totally see that he's likely telling the truth, just because, I mean, given that this is such a big deal game for Sony, they don't want people to play too big a chunk of the game before release and then kind of feel like they've seen too much of it before it even comes out, right? So if what I played was just a chunk of it, this game has to be even longer, I would think, and bigger generally in scope than the first one. And as you said, the first one was already decently lengthy at around 15-ish hours.
Absolutely. So I guess let's talk about the first one that they had you do. Where'd that take place, and what'd they have you doing in it?
So the first of both demos took place in a snowy area, and basically you get a sense for Ellie's life after the events of the first game. Some time has passed, and she now works a patrol route. I don't want to say too much in terms of exactly where these things take place, just because I don't know how much people want to get spoiled. But basically, we see kind of a day in the life of Ellie, these days, after everything happened in the first game, and now she works this patrol route where she goes around and, looks out for infected and clears infected around the perimeter of the base she's a part of, and or kind of like the settlement she's a part of. And I would say this demo is a little more exploration and story focused, so you got a lot of cutscenes, a lot of, walking and talking, mainly with Dina, who is the other woman from the trailer, from the initial reveal trailer that Ellie is dancing with, and later kisses in that trailer. So that's what her name's Dina, and you get a sense for their friendship, kind of the way their relationship has been built up to this point. And so basically you follow them as they investigate, various homes and like dilapidated buildings around the perimeter of where they're, living. Again, just to clear out infected and stuff, and you get a sense for their shared history and kind of what got them to the point of where they are. And so I would say that one was more story focused, but it's so beautiful. Like, this whole thing takes place in a snowy environment and buildings therein. And the game is just absolutely gorgeous. Now, that's not surprising. This is a first-party AAA PS4 game. It's going to look amazing. But it still bears mentioning that it really does just look great. And the environment is so immersive. There's one point where Ellie is riding a horse through a snowstorm that's just getting worse and worse. And she's trying to find Dina. She was following Dina, but then the snowstorm got too intense, and so you lose her. And suddenly Ellie's like, Dina? And you don't hear her respond anymore, and it suddenly gets really isolating because you can barely see anywhere around you because it's just like a whiteout. And so the atmosphere here is just phenomenal already. It really is. They're building such great atmosphere, which isn't surprising if you play the first Last of Us, which is all about atmosphere, right?
Yeah. I mean, it seems Naughty Dog really loves to bring the snow with their sequels.
Yeah.
But do you think this was right from the beginning or a little bit after the beginning?
This seems to me like it would be toward the beginning, just because if you've seen the trailer that they revealed yesterday in the State of Play, you get a sense for a story beat that might happen, which may serve as the inspiration for Ellie to go on this murderous killing spree that she seems to be going on in Part 2, and that does seem to have to do with Dina, and again, I'm trying to avoid out-and-out spoilers here for those who haven't seen the trailer or who might just want to, go in knowing not everything. But basically, Dina seems to be part of the reason Ellie might go on this rampage. And so, based on what I'm piecing together, I think that part of the demo with them together must happen toward the beginning.
It makes
now,
sense.
again, I don't know for sure, but I think that's probably the case.
Now, you said it was mainly just exploration. Is there anything new about the exploration, or is it what we've come to expect from Last of Us?
So it is called The Last of Us Part 2, and I think that's very important because it literally is a continuation of The Last of Us, the first one, in the sense that it feels so similar to the first game. Like, this is not a sequel where things are being redone from the ground up. This isn't, there isn't a whole lot of, like, innovation here. This is a case of, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And that's fine. It basically uses The Last of Us Part 1 as a base and then builds onto that. So, you still have, like, you still use R1 to go into listening mode. She has that just like Joel did in the first game, where you can, listen, so you can see where the enemies are around you. You still hold L1 to sprint. It's like almost the same exact button setup. But they just add more stuff onto it. So, for example, now you can sprint and jump at any time. So there are a couple of parts in the demo where you have to make long jumps, which wasn't really in the first game as much. Now, that doesn't really... There's still no, fear of death, at least not in what I played, because if you remember in the first game, you couldn't, jump off cliffs like you can in Uncharted by accident and kill yourself. There's really no way to do that. And what I've noticed here is even when you do have to run and jump at the same time, if you miss, you're not dying for it necessarily. So, it's stuff like that. But there's also an increased focus on stealth now. So now there's grass that you can hide within. This is more germane to the second demo, which took place in a town that's just, it's got a lot of grassy, foresty areas around it. But there are different levels of grass, like heights, that you can sneak around in now. And, the taller grass will hide you more, but, still, if enemies come right up on you, they're still going to notice you regardless of whether you're in the grass or not. So this isn't necessarily Metal Gear Solid style stealth, which you can sometimes play with how realistic it might be. This is more... Actually, that I would say is the main thing that I took away from this, is actually that the AI is so much better. And like I said, this is more germane to the second demo because that was more gameplay focused and sneaking around and trying to avoid getting detected and fighting and stuff like that. But I did notice that the AI was just a lot more intense this time around. But yeah, so it uses The Last of Us Part 1 as a base and builds on top of that. So don't go into this expecting things to be all that different. In fact, I was remarkably surprised by just how similar it felt. It really does feel like you're just playing more of the first game, but bigger and better and with a few more, things layered on top of it.
Since it sounds like most of the major gameplay took part in this second demo, which just goes to show how intense the story sequences are for these games, that 2 hours of your demo is basically just exploration and story, which not a knock against it. I'm a guy all about story, so yeah. Cool. Let's as long as they can keep me invested, let's do it. But
well, I think they will.
We do have a game to play, so what felt the same and what was different with that section of the demo?
So the base is definitely, the same. We had a few options at the parts of the game we were at, but not necessarily, they didn't want to show everything that you're going to be able to do throughout the game. But basically, crafting worked the exact same way. You can still get the vitamins and improve your abilities, and that works exactly the same ways it did before. One thing that's cooler about crafting this time, though, is that you can actually see Ellie kind of take apart whatever weapon you're crafting and do the upgrades to it. It's not like a perfectly detailed thing, but she does take the weapon apart, and I thought that was a really cool kind of nod to what she's actually doing, as opposed to the first game where you just kind of magically upgrade things with these parts you collect. So there's that. Also, what's worth noting is that the vitamins you take to improve your own skills, they actually seem to be part of a skill tree now. So it's not just you pick the ability you want and you level it up. You actually have to learn abilities in order now. And the skill tree, I think they're skill trees, and the one I had was called Survival, so I assume that to me they're going to be maybe 2 more skill trees in the final game that you can level up when you want as well. But only one skill tree was unlocked in the demo I played, and it included skills and upgrades like you would expect a survival skill tree to have, like a wider listening mode radius and moving faster while you're in listening mode and things like that. Combat feels different. It feels the same and different, right? Because you still have to do QTEs if something gets a hold of you, like mashing square to get out of it. But when you go into melee combat, it's a bit different this time around and a little more visceral, I'd say, because you have a dodge button now. So you can press L1 to dodge, and you kind of have to do that because if you just mash square like you did in the first game, you're not necessarily going to get out of the fight either alive or at least without taking damage, because if you don't dodge, enemies will counterattack you and they will hit you. So hitting L1 at the right time is very necessary in melee combat now. And I really like that about it, actually. It makes each encounter feel a little more dangerous than maybe it did in the first game, especially once you kind of got a hold of that game's mechanics and you learn what you need to be afraid of and what you don't. And what's interesting on that note is that it's kind of funny. The infected don't feel as dangerous this time around as I did in the first game. Now, maybe that's because I'm more used to them. And now, I mean, the clickers are still scary as hell. They're still terrifying looking, and they sound even scarier. So the threat they possess in terms of atmosphere is still very much there. But in the first game, you had to craft shivs, right? And those shivs would break. The only way you could kill a clicker instantly is by sneaking up on them, not getting detected, and using a shiv to kill them immediately. Well, there are no shivs in this game because Ellie has a switchblade that never breaks. So you don't have to worry about crafting shivs on the go anymore. Shivs are, at least from what I can tell, a thing of the past. So Ellie has her switchblade, she melee attacks with it, and instead of it's kind of cool how they highlight, the differences in Joel and Ellie's physical stature, because, in the first game, Joel would, he'd choke enemies out, right? Or, but in this game, he would stab the clickers and other things, but he'd choke human enemies out. In this game, Ellie doesn't give a damn. She'll crawl up behind somebody, stab them in the neck with her switchblade, and just get it done immediately. There's no more choking, none of that. She just does the deed, and she's done. And the same thing with clickers and such, and infected. The fact that you don't have to craft shivs anymore really makes things feel a lot more streamlined. And I can see people not necessarily liking that, because it does take away that element of, oh man, do I have enough tools to take care of, however many clickers are here, or do I just need to sneak past? Now, as long as you can stay undetected, you can pretty much sneak up on whatever infected you want and take them out. But of course, they don't necessarily make it that easy because the AI is a lot smarter this time around. And so, they're a lot more aware of the tricks that you might try. I noticed that even runners and such that wouldn't necessarily, they were easy to sneak up on in the first game. They kind of will stagger around and suddenly turn around without warning, and just to kind of keep you on your toes and not let you think that you can just kind of sneak up on them whenever you want.
So I actually wanted to ask about that, because you talked about the streamlining process when it comes to not having to worry about shivs anymore and whatnot. And I know crafting and maintaining your inventory was sort of labeled as this big part of the original Last of Us, but I had excess bullets by the end of that game. I could not pick up everything because I always was in good shape as far as that's concerned. Is that something they've addressed? Or, with the whole switchblade never breaking thing, is it almost exacerbated because of that?
I would say it's a little bit of both. In the first demo, it felt like I had everything I needed and was never in any danger. But the second demo, which was more gameplay focused, I died so many times just trying to get through that town because the AI is so much better. And I did a lot of exploring, but there are so many enemies around that it's really hard to search freely. And I never felt like I had access to enough of the supplies I needed to have an easy time of things. So I died quite a bit in the second demo, and I would say things are definitely more challenging this time around. Even with the permanent switchblade that can be upgraded, the lack of shivs, maybe that part has been lessened in terms of complexity, but the enemies are so much smarter this time around that I think that more than makes up for it. And what's funny, that kind of plays into what I was saying about the infected not really even being the focus, at least in the demos I played. They're there, and they're a part of the world, and you still have to be careful about them, and that's the world they're still living in. But it's the human enemies I found that you really have to worry about, and that's because of, and I'm so conflicted on this. This is the weirdest thing, but the human enemies in this game have dogs, or at least some of them do. And the dogs were the bane of my existence. I died more often to dogs in the second demo than anything else. In fact, I don't think I ever got killed by a single infected. I think it was only human enemies and dogs that killed me. And the reason why is that dogs can track your scent. That's a new mechanic now in The Last of Us Part 2, where wherever Ellie goes, she leaves behind a scent, naturally. And if you press R1 to go into listening mode, not only do you see where the enemies are around you, but you also see Ellie's scent trail that you've been leaving behind. And dogs can pick up on that scent and just follow you. And so you know that no matter where you're going, as long as this dog is on your trail, they're going to lead whatever, enemy they're with, their human enemy they're with, right to you. And the dogs attack you too. So it's not as though you don't have to worry about the dog attacking you. Everything does. So, here I am, like I'm used to being able to just kind of sneak around and mess around with the AI and not really ever feel like I'm in too much danger from the first game. And then suddenly I'm getting flanked by all these human enemies, their dogs are finding me, I'm constantly running, I'm fumbling with the controls trying to apply a health pack while I'm hidden, before the enemies find me again, and they will find you. These enemies are so much smarter than in the first game, and I felt like once they discovered me, I felt like I was always on the run. And even when I was able to hide again, they were always within enough distance that I always had to keep moving. And then, of course, if they get close enough again, they're dogs. If you haven't killed them all already, they're gonna catch up or pick up on that scent again. So it's a really interesting thing because, me and John, right? We're like the resident Game Explained dog lovers. We love dogs, but in this game, dogs suck. They are the bane of my existence. But at the same time, I still feel bad killing them because they're still dogs, and it's just awful to see Ellie kill a dog. But and it's actually pretty realistic too, because the enemies they're with, they'll get angry. They'll be like, "Oh my God, Fido!" Not that Fido isn't either named, but yeah. You killed my dog! And they just they redouble their efforts to find you, and it was very realistic in that sense. But yeah, I was constantly dying in the second demo. Now I submit I'm not super good at stealth games. I've never have been, but I was able to get the first game into a routine where I kind of knew how the AI worked and I knew how I could exploit the game. That is not the case here in Part 2. Like, you really do have to, fear the enemies and the threats they all represent. And even a single soldier and their dog, if your aim isn't true, that can still be a tough thing for you to deal with. So it's really between the enhanced melee combat, which forces you to dodge, as well as the new mechanics like dogs being able to, pick up on your trail. Combat and survival in general just feel more difficult and more engaging this time around. Like, you really have to learn the mechanics. And I assume one of the reasons I was dying so much was because I was kind of trying to brute force my way the way I would in the first game, just using melee attacks and just using guns and things like that. I've never been a big grenade guy, like setting up mines and stuff. That's never really been my style. But I feel like if maybe I had used better, I was better with those kinds of things, that maybe I would have had an easier time. But the game really goes out of its way to force you to learn how to play it, for sure.
I mean, I kind of like the idea of that challenge. It makes it seem a bit more engaging in that way. And yeah, as far as the dogs, them kept picking up on your scent. Maybe it's something that'll come later, but was there any way to hide your scent or dissolve your scent?
Yeah, so the game tells you, well, just keep moving and the dog will lose your scent. And that's true, but once they've picked up on it, you're already in a lot of trouble. And so you can keep moving, but that's kind of what I mean is that, how in the first game, with even the human enemies, you could just camp out really wherever you want for as long as you want, and just kind of wait for that right moment to sneak up and get a stealth kill. That is so not the case now, because if you stay in one place for too long, the dog will find you. So you're always moving and you're always having to think on your feet, and I just wasn't prepared for that because Part 1 was so much easier and more exploitable by comparison. So not only are the graphics and the presentation obviously stepped up, way up from Part 1 being a late era PS4 game, but they've used that extra processing power to go, really improve the enemy AI as well.
Yeah, was there anything else from the demo either demo that really stood out to you?
Well, with the removal of shivs, there are no more of those doors that you can only unlock by sacrificing a shiv. So I don't know if there's going to be kind of a replacement for that, but what I did notice is that as part of the core path in both demos, I think, definitely the first one, you can use melee attacks against glass now and just shatter glass and then climb through the window. That doesn't work on every window, of course, but the ones it does, it's a really cool feeling because it's literally Ellie just like bashing a window open and just climbing right through. So there are no, locked doors now that can only be opened with shivs, and I'm guessing that maybe the replacement for that is that you're going to have to look out for windows, because there were locked doors that I came across, and so maybe you'll have to look out for windows that can be broken through to get into them instead. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really sure what that replacement will be, if there even is a replacement for those doors, but I did notice that. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Actually, going back to the clickers, were there any new types of clickers? Because, usually when you have these zombie-type games, you want to introduce new types of enemies going forward. Did you see any new ones yet, or still the same standbys?
Yeah, there's one called the Shambler, and I don't exactly remember what sets it apart, but I do know that there are... I don't know if these were in the first game or not, I can't remember, but there are these really ugly, giant, mutated infected that can, kind of fire clouds of smoke at you, like clouds of noxious smoke.
That might have been in the first game. I'm thinking the ones that you fought in the gymnasium, but I can't remember offhand.
Those are called bloaters. I think they're called bloaters, and so shamblers are a little different, and I can't remember if the one I'm talking about was the same, but there is definitely at least one new enemy type. But otherwise, the clickers and the runners work pretty much the same way they did in the first game, which is, again, that's why I was so surprised. These games are all about the post-apocalypse that comes about from the cordyceps fungus taking over people, but it's the regular people and their dogs that you really have to watch out for more than the infected, which, it almost is an interesting, I don't know if that's intentional, but it really does play into the overall thematic resonance of The Last of Us that, yeah, there are these zombie-like things going around and killing with reckless abandon, but oftentimes it's just regular-ass people that you really have to watch out for, because they can be even crazier, because they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Never trust your fellow man.
Exactly. So, even if you go back to the intro of the first game, they're trying to, Joel and his daughter, right? They're trying to escape all the hell that's breaking loose because of the infection, but at the end of the beginning of the first game, it's actually a military soldier who kills his daughter, not an infected. Mm-hmm. So this does seem to be carrying forth that overall theme of, yeah, the infected are bad, but they don't know what they're doing. They just got taken over by this fungus. It's the people who know what they're doing, who choose to be evil, who might be the bigger threat. And what Neil Druckmann kind of told us before we played is that the theme of this story, of part 2, is kind of how far are you willing to go for the ones you love, and how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice for that, and is there any coming back from that? And I think we can see that if you've seen the trailers for part 2, where, this does seem to be a revenge story. Again, I don't want to say too much about why or how, but I think if you're a fan of the series and you've watched all the trailers, I think you can probably piece together what seems to be going on here. And this does seem to be more about Ellie's bloodlust to get just exact revenge for the loved ones who have been hurt. And that's a different theme from the first game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first one was just sort of letting people in.
Yeah, exactly. And this game is just it really seems to be about bloodlust and anger and just rage. Because Ellie, man, I'll tell you what, Ellie does not screw around in this game. She is tough. And she is a one-woman army. She does not screw around. And the violence is just as visceral and just as brutal as in the first game. Both the violence you dish out and the violence done to you. I killed so many enemies in so many brutal ways, and dogs. I hate it every time, but I also killed a bunch of dogs in brutal ways. But the death scenes are just as brutal too. I died so many times, and I was, whether it's a dog tearing out my throat or getting bludgeoned to death or shot, the death scenes are still very brutal, and so are the enemy deaths. Everything is just, it's that same... you see Mortal Kombat, that's really violent, but in kind of a fun, silly way. This is violent in a you almost want to turn away from the screen because it's so brutal.
And I heard that's what they're going for. They said they wanted you to feel uncomfortable with the deaths in this game. So it seems like, at least with you, that's definitely holding true.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't surprise me too much that Ellie's a killing machine, considering she was, raised by Joel.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? So, that makes perfect sense. And you really do get the sense that, you can feel the development that Ellie has gone through since the first game. This isn't a blank slate character. This is, I got very much the sense that this is not the kind of sequel you want to go into without playing the first game. You really want to go in with the history of the first game fresh in your mind,
So, yeah, well, any final thoughts on your preview of Last of Us Part 2?
Well, there is one thing we hadn't talked about, and that's the fact that there are new crafting, like there are new things you can craft. They didn't show us too much of that in what we played, but one of the things you can craft now is a silencer for your pistols. But like everything else in Last of Us, except for switchblades now, things break. So they're temporary silencers. So you can craft a silencer, but if you use those materials, you got to know that silencer is going to break after you've popped off like 4 or 5 shots, maybe even less. So I thought that was interesting. So it looks like you can craft temporary upgrades for your guns and other weapons on the fly and not just melee weapons. So I thought that was interesting. And I also saw a bit of an echo from Uncharted 4 in the sense that you can now throw ropes to create like climbing, create ways to climb up out of places like you could with the grappling hook in Uncharted 4. So that doesn't work quite the same way, but it reminded me of that so much that I wanted to mention it.
Yeah.
And I would say just, in general, as I said before, go in knowing that this is truly a part 2 in every sense of the word. This is not being rebuilt from the ground up. This is not innovating and attempting to be something different from the first one. It is very much the first one, but bigger and more refined and smarter and hopefully better, but it may even... I found it jarring just how similar everything was, from the interface to the controls to the button prompts. Like, everything feels just like the first one, but again, bigger and more refined. But go in knowing that it's very similar to the first game.
Actually, one final question before we end this off, because we didn't talk about her too much, but how do you feel about Dina as a character? Do you get ingratiated to her pretty quickly?
Absolutely. By the time that 2-hour demo ended, or 2.5-2-hour demo ended, I felt like I felt like I really knew her, and I felt like I was really cheering her and Ellie on, and I really wanted to learn more about her. And yeah, I mean, it's that signature Naughty Dog style storytelling, right? They know how to write these characters that you immediately care about and who seem immediately relatable. And I got that sense, like watching Ellie and Dina interact with each other, the small talk, it felt so natural, and Naughty Dog does that so well. And even just that 2 hours, it really got me into their, invested in their relationship and what happens to them. And, being a Last of Us game, I don't think anything's good is going to happen to them. Probably not.
Not usually, not for anybody.
Yeah, so no, I was really into Dina and just her interactions with Ellie, and just the characters in general were really, like it's got that Naughty Dog style storytelling, that character building, and I love it. And I know, you'll appreciate this, Derek. All the people who were so upset about, that first trailer with Ellie and Dina kissing, they're going to get even more upset by the final game, because the game does not shy away from any of that thematic. Like, it doubles down. It doubles down. And so it's going to piss off all the bigots of YouTube, and I'm super excited about that. So I'm very happy with what I played gameplay-wise and thematically, the story and the characters. I think they're landing on something really special here, and it's obvious why it has taken them so long to not only make, but also properly re-reveal at the event.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think that covers it for our Last of Us Part 2 preview. So thank you for watching. And if you like this video, be sure to like us on Facebook and Twitter at GameXplain. And of course, make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on Last of Us Part 2 and other things gaming as well. Until next time, bye.